Personally, Jeff Kay is kind of the reason. He's the who you just heard from very appropriately to hear from him. Honestly, we were shelving the whole carbon project idea on the back of not being able to have an opportunity to graze beyond that 25-year period. So, next slide. Bear with me. You're right. So, I think the best way to describe, what we're doing is to just highlight the strategy. So, our strategy is to deploy the landed assets at Top Yarraman to their highest and best use to achieve a sustainable grazing operation supported by income streams or alternative income streams from natural capital assets. It's taken a little minute, but if you look at the place as it is today, the orange area there is a biodiversity stewardship offsets program, and the bulk of that orange area, probably 80% of it, is timber country. So relatively valueless in the scheme of a grazing operation, but is by and large on majority box gum grassy woodland. So the threatened ecological community that is being set aside as a perpetual biodiversity offsets program with the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust. That's all I'm going to say about that part. This session is on the carbon project, which is the blue area. So that's a 77.7 hectare, let's call it 78 hectare area that came about actually as a result of a September 2023 natural capital assessment on the place. I was fortunate that at the time, and I still am, working with a UK-based impact fund called Kibis, and my day job is running assets for funds and private equity. These being an impact fund, were particularly driven by doing, creating more with less. And to that end, I was able to leverage some of the knowledge I'd gained in that corporate arena to find the right people to help us assess this from a natural capital perspective. What we found was that southern end, north's this end, that southwest end was higher in sequestration than the other end, albeit the other end is okay. But certainly when we looked at it from our highest and best use aspect, it became certainly clear that going down this track would work. We put the brakes on pretty quickly when we realised we couldn't graze under the then existing method, and it wasn't until Wardy's circular description happened that we happened upon Jeff, who then helped us along with Christophe Burr, Simon Campbell, others, to get into this project. Next slide. Pretty wordy. I'm not going to even begin to go through, all of that. Essentially, it's a 78 hectare project. We're aiming to, on a net basis, deliver 40,000 accus. There's a lot of sort of unknowns here, and I think I was talking to the team today about just optionality, finding optionality in what we do, and we don't know as a group or as a community what's around the corner, but what was in scoping this out, what we did do was say, well, imagine if one day we have to inset our emissions as producers. Well, what this does on the options basis is it does actually allow us to inset 85% of the emissions of that place. So we did get an assessment done on our emissions, work off 3,500 use plus plus followers, plus 100 cattle. So no surprises, 90% of those emissions are methane based, as is usual in a grazing operation. So it's kind of a nice to know. My view on that is there would need, if we are all going carbon neutral, well, there does need to be an underlying premium to attach to that, because that cost of staying in business on current margins would be difficult to justify. What we're doing here is replacing that threatened ecological community. So exactly what Jeff said. I don't need to say too much more, but it's a bit like what he said as far as Blakely's box gum grassy woodland threatened ecological community. It stands up as a good thing to do, but it's also a financial decision that makes sense. And I think Wardy wanted me to particularly emphasise that element of how we came to this decision and the decision process. Those two pictures there, one's the prep, the top one's the spray prep. So we actually bought this block about 2 years after we bought the main block, and it was pretty much covered in serrated tussock, so we nuked it. And what that did is it took away all the competition. In taking away the competition, it enabled us to sow into or seed into a pretty handy bed. That was it was pretty dry when Tom came and did the seeding, and we were all, what do we think we do? So let's just go for it. And fortunately, we had some reasonable rain afterwards. Pretty dry autumn, but at the end of the day, these are native seeds. They are surrounded by their ancestors. Like we're back onto a national park. It's like you sit there and say, this is risk. Well, there's trees everywhere. Like we're not doing something exotic here. We're actually doing what was already here some time ago. So yes, there's a risk factor. There always is, but it kind of goes into the thinking. James, I thought this was useful just in terms of what the Clean Energy Regulator saw to enable our open woodland to gain approval. We've gone a little wider than 15. We've gone to 20. And what's ultimately happening, if you've seen these in their glory, these box gum species, you know how large they get. The thing here is that what we're getting away from here is that standard tram track, you can never graze here because you've just created a national park, to actually having that grass, those native grasses in amongst these these native ukes that actually ultimately derive you a net benefit from a grazing capacity over a long-term basis. Because yes, over 25 years, there's good project gains. But if I'm unable to do anything after 25 years, well, what good is it? In other words, so we are always about thinking about the long term, because it's not the highest and best use for 25 years. It's the highest and best use over a period. And then what does that actually translate to? Next one. Okay, so it's the money slide. So, in thinking about this, the first thing I want to say is this is the decision making, or the quantitative element of the decision making that we came up with, and this is our stuff. So I'm going to put the hazards out there, which I said down in the bottom there. This is all unique to Top Yarraman, right? This is not your farm. It's not your farm. This is our farm. Okay. Every asset is very different. We have done some work. We've done a fair bit of work, but I have not seen a single ACCU nor made a single dollar. Okay, so I'm not sitting here saying, oh, you should jump into this. What I'm saying is this is what we've done, and this is what the numbers told us. and justified us into doing. We also have a cracking group of people in our corner. So you've heard from Jeff, Christoph, from Mutual, Simon Campbell, Tom and Tom. You know, we did not go into this and just went, right, this is just like one of those land care grants and go for it, even though we've done a fair bit of seeding in the past, because this is a little bit of big boys' toys, because you don't want to get this wrong, because there's a lot more rigmarole and administration around it. It's not scary. It's just there's quite a bit at stake now once you're starting to make some material returns. So on the returns piece, so that area that I showed you in light blue is relatively steep. The team were there today. We can get around it on a bike. We can pretty much access all of it on a bike. It's not too bad, but it's pretty rough, and it's probably the roughest part of the place, which ironically, it was also the highest sequestering area on the place. For us, we felt that it would run 5 DSE, so we were working off running a group of weathers out there, say 350 odd, and that we were taking a fleece off a year, say $50 a fleece, right? You know, call it a 5 kilo fleece at $10 now. We know wool's at 14 or whatever, but we've also seen it in the, you know, scraping the bottom of the barrel too. So those numbers, and I thought, because I dug up my models and I went, you know what, I'm just going to put the models that I had at the time to show you what I was thinking at the time. So pretty straightforward, and I would suggest to probably all of us that know a little bit about running weathers that they're kind of pretty straightforward, pretty robust style of animals. Those numbers, give or take, you know, it's probably the carrying capacity where we could have a discussion. But on our farm, we felt that was the number. Okay. When we looked at the project itself, the key component, the key variable in this is the yield, and you can see from that board over there. What's the bloke in the pink shirt's name?
Joe. Yes.
Joe. That Joe brought along, that the sequestration yield across our area varies quite significantly. And I certainly, you know, caution, you know, everybody around that point. Know your numbers is the point. You know, the financial bit's one bit, but the actual drivers of those are key. So know your yield, and ensure that you get the support, obviously mutual, to get you at least on the way to commencing some assumptions. And to me, that's the starting point. So we know our yield. As far as price goes, based on the ACCU curve and some of the numbers that I've seen, and certainly the underlying fundamentals of what we know as the safeguard mechanism, the average price over a 25-year period, I plugged in at $73. Today it's around 38 to 40. We know there is an urgency, or there is certainly times are coming with respect to these safeguard mechanisms, and so that is probably the main driver of market values of ACCU. So we felt that was an appropriate style of number, and I didn't worry about inflation adjustment. I essentially just put a growth on there. So I've got my yield and I've got my price and I know my area. Now the slide that Wardy put up before with respect to that impact on grazing early, what we did, and I think it is probably too conservative, but it was a way of penalising that scenario two being the carbon project and seeing how robust it was. I told you that we didn't want to do any projects unless we could graze it. But what I did here was I pulled back the carrying capacity by 60%. Right. So I basically gave myself a far lower number of animals that I could graze on there to see what actually happened, with respect to, it's almost going carbon or livestock. I'll just put a bit of livestock back in, as opposed to, this is going to give shelter. I can now use it as landing paddock. Everything's going to happen and I'm off to the races. It was probably too conservative, but it still made the outcome far more compelling than running my 350 wethers on 78 hectares. So ultimately, on a gross margin basis, on a like versus like, I was coming in at about $342 a hectare on the wethers, and I'm coming in over $1,200 a hectare on the carbon over a 25-year period. So when I ran a net present value of cash flows, and I mucked around with it a little bit, but in the main, I'm well over 100 to 120% ahead on a project basis. Now, because I already owned the land, I didn't have a situation where I was buying land, so to speak. Some people are looking to genuinely acquire country, so they'd have to put the land value in there. I already had the land, so it came back to being a project versus project. But if you were buying land, you would obviously have to put that in, which would actually bring back your ultimate return. I won't ask whether there's any questions, because there probably will be, and we'll do it at the end. But that is as simple as I can explain it. There is a lot that's sort of gone into the thinking and workings to get those numbers, but in essence, it was gross margin versus gross margin based on confidence around drivers, primarily carbon yield and to a lesser extent price. But when I do price adjust, particularly, I'm still well ahead at market value. Yep. I just thought this might be interesting, just from a timeline perspective. A lot gets lost in all these sort of war stories, but we applied in May 2024. We received the approval by the Clean Energy Regulator in September 24. There were police checks. There was a forestry approval. We had a reasonable level of administration that Christoph mainly supported all of that, fronted it on commercial terms, which we were very grateful for. First ground prep November 2024. So you're actually not allowed to touch the project until it's approved. So you have to do any groundwork post-approval, so quite quickly post-approval. We did those sprays. Second spray happened in March 25. Between March and June, we completed the seeding. It took 3 days or so. 3 days in the Hilux from the Toms, and then we actually ended up getting on Amazon and getting some of those little veggie seeders to do the steep stuff. And it was, I should have a photo on there, but there's just us in our giggle hats just poking along with a veggie seeder and honestly trying to replicate nature. We did run out of seed, so we were a bit generous. So we had to ring the Tom and we had to get some urgent deliveries. But we got there, and sort of, so we're done. We then got an email that said, actually, I think Jeff Kay's in a little bit of strife. He's been he's had to explain himself to the Clean Energy Regulator, and so I thought, this will be interesting. So in Jeff went, and in true Jeff style, he came out with flying colours with an approval, a ratified approval under the open canopy, the canopy distance approach. So I thought, right, well, while the iron's hot, guys, we're going straight in after that. And so Jeff and Christoph promptly came back and helped us go through that extra hurdle, given the Clean Energy Regulator's interest in this style of open woodland project. So we are where we are, and I intend on putting that first offsets report in around June 2027. our style is to make sure that these things are up and to ascertain that we've actually got this happening. If you go and apply for ACCUs and you get ACCUs and you don't have the trees up, you've actually got to give your ACCUs back. So we're quite keen to make sure that what we've got is there. So right now we're out there today and everyone's on their hands and knees looking at sort of little acacias coming up in tiny little areas, and you could be forgiven for thinking it looks like a Ponzi scheme because even all the scrapings have been grown over. But as I sort of half joked, but I am quite serious, I like to think in 2 years' time this will be a very different looking paddock, and then within that sort of 5 to 7 that we will be stocking it again, hopefully at higher than 40% than as the current. But so far, we're on the road and we're looking forward to seeing how it goes.